Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I am the sports editor at the Herald Democrat, Jason Della Rosa, and we have hit the final week of the football season and our final podcast to recap two great state championship games, one with an outcome that Texoma really liked and one that Texoma did not like. We're going to get into all that as we close out what's been a really good season. We had some teams make the playoffs that didn't make the playoffs last year. We had some teams make the playoffs and advance all the way to AT&T Stadium. If you're listening to this, probably it would be said that last week for when this is going to be posted online. And we will start with the Class 3A Division I state championship game between Pottsboro and defending champion Grandview. This was a game where I think a lot of people going in, and probably rightfully so because they were the defending champ, picked Grandview to come out on top and repeat. They had a lot of the same players that they did last year, so it was somewhat expected on the prognosticators' parts to pick them. And while they did come away with a 42-35 victory over the Cardinals, it was not an easy win. There were some times it looked like Grandview was going to kind of break things open. They got up 14 points a couple times, but anybody who has watched Pottsboro over the last month essentially was just waiting for the Cardinals to get back in it and potentially have a chance to win this game. To kind of run down the way things shook out for those who either weren't there or were not able to watch on TV. The score was tied 7-7 after the first quarter. Pottsboro scored first on a run by Cy Shope. And then Tremaine Galat, he tied the game late in the first quarter, so it's 7-7. And then things kind of got crazy in the second quarter. We had 5 touchdowns combined scored. Grandview jumped up 21-7. They got a touchdown run on the first play of the second quarter after recovering a Pottsboro fumble, and then they scored 2 minutes later after a quick 3-and-out by the Cardinals. So it's 21-7, like middle-ish of the second quarter, and there's a real chance right there for Pottsboro kind of have things snowball on them. Grandview's, they're sensing blood in the water. They have a chance to kind of not put the game away, but maybe kind of put it out of reach for Pottsboro to pull off a comeback. And the Cardinals, like we said, they do what they do. They went down and scored. Jason Hooker caught a 15-yard touchdown pass from Braden Plyler. Great catch. It was the number 2 play that night on SportsCenter's top 10 plays. He got behind a defender on the left side of the end zone, had to tip the ball with his left hand because it was a little too far, so he had to reach forward to get it, and he was able to knock it up and grab it with both hands and get his left foot down before he landed out of bounds. It was a really great catch, and that was a play they had to score on that drive. Otherwise, like I said, they had a chance to go down 28-7. Hooker also had a fourth down catch, a sliding fourth down catch to keep the drive going. Pottsboro had to go for it, sensing that things were going to get out of hand. And then all of a sudden, 3 minutes later, Grandview gets the ball, goes down the field, and scores. So they're back up by 2, and they're getting the ball to start the second half. So they have a chance if they can hold on to that lead. They have a chance to come out second half and go up 35-14 and really put some distance between them and Pottsboro. But again, Pottsboro shows that grit and that toughness that they have all year. They put together a drive, 6 plays, the last being a 29-yard catch and run for a touchdown. Plyler found Zach Talley with 51 seconds to go in the half. So instead of being down 2 scores going into the break, it's 28-21. They're right in it. Plenty of opportunity to make this continue this game as a close one in the second half. The third quarter was the lowest scoring quarter of the game. Grandview scored a touchdown with a minute to go in the third to go up 35-21, and this was basically the sequence of events that kind of changed everything. Grandview came out, started the third quarter, didn't really have anything going. Pottsboro had a chance. They go down. They have first and goal from the 4-yard line. They get to the 1-yard line before it ends up being fourth and goal, and they can't punch it in. They've run it every time. They ran it on first down, ran it on second down, ran it on third down. Now they have fourth and goal at the 1. They run it again, and the Zebras stop them. They stuff the run into the line, but they're off sides. So now the ball goes from the 1-yard line to the half-yard line, and Pottsboro runs it again. They get stopped for a 2-yard loss. Grandview holds. So instead of Pottsboro tying the game at 28, about let's say 4 minutes to go in the third quarter. That's probably about where that touchdown would have had. So instead of having a tie game with about 16 minutes left in the game, Grandview holds the lead, and the worst part of that sequence was not just that Pottsboro didn't score. Grandview takes over at its 3-yard line, and they only need 6 plays to go 97 yards and go up 35-21. So you had a huge 14-point swing. It wasn't even like they were able to, force them to punt from their end zone. They had two of those plays covered 40 yards. There was a 40-yard pass and a 40-yard run, and then Glot, he finished that off with at that point his 4th touchdown run of the game. And then so Pottsboro's down. They're down 2 scores going into the fourth quarter. Not where you want to be. And then they come out in the fourth quarter. Titus Lyons catches a 53-yard touchdown pass from Plyler, who was rolling to his right, and Lyons was able to get behind the defender down the right sideline, caught it in stride, perfect pass, perfect catch. So now there's 9:30 left, and it was back to a 1-score game, 35-28. Unfortunately, Pottsboro was unable to force Grandview to punt. They used 11 plays and almost 6 minutes of the clock to go 84 yards. Gulat had his 5th and final touchdown. It was a 20-yard run with 3.5 minutes to go. So now they're back up 2 scores. But again, the Cardinals. You've seen them, win by in the final minute against Malakoff. You've seen them stop a 2-point conversion in double overtime to beat Gladewater. You've seen them intercept a pass with 45 seconds to go in the end zone to beat Brock to get to this point. So 3.5 minutes, plenty of time for the Cardinals to have a chance, and they do. They need barely a minute after a really good kickoff return from Cooper Townsley for 51 yards to set them up at the 41-yard line of Grandview. So right there, you're automatically within striking distance. You have a chance. They needed 7 plays, and Plyler finished off that drive with a weaving 19-yard run. It was a pass, and he was looking for somebody. He pump fake, didn't see anybody, started going left, kind of weaved back towards the right, around a couple guys, got to the end zone. So there's 2.5 minutes left. It's now the 42-35 is your score. They have a chance to pull this off. If they can get the onside kick, go to overtime. Maybe they go for 2 and a win as the underdog in the closing minute or so. But unfortunately, the ball went out of bounds, and Grandview was able to pick up a first down after Pottsboro used some timeouts, and they were able to hold on and win. It was a really great game. Unfortunately, it's the only game Pottsboro's lost all season. Grandview finished with 1 loss as well. They're both 15-1. And there was a crowd of almost 15,000 people watched it. What more can you say than just a great season for the Cardinals? It's the best season in school history. We've harped on that every week because the only other time they had even been to the semifinals was 2008. They set the school record for wins with 15. The old record was 13 by that semifinal team, so they broke that record by 2. They're the highest scoring offense in school history. And so there's just a lot of positives to the year in this game. Cy Shope went over 2,000 yards rushing for the season. Titus Lyons finished off his season with 8 catches for 133 yards and a score. That was the 8 catches tie is for the 5th most in a 3A championship game in the history, and the 133 yards just fell short. I believe it was 10 yards short of getting into the top 5 there. So, he finished his season with 71 catches for 1,256 yards and 16 touchdowns. Shope officially had 249 carries for 2,066 yards and 36 touchdowns. And should be pointed out now that the season's over. He was dealing with a knee injury, probably the last 3 or 4 games. Ever since that Malakoff game, he had to leave in the second quarter, and he didn't return after getting hurt. And he wasn't 100%. Not that anybody is really 100% this time of year. But he was playing through it and gritting through it, and he still was able to contribute in this game. He had 20 carries for 79 yards and a touchdown. And Braden Plyler, he completed 19 of 25 passes for 254 yards with 3 touchdowns and an interception. He also ran 18 times for 56 yards and a score. He showed what he could do when he was healthy. His first 2 years in high school, he was slated to be the starter, and he got hurt in the first game of the season each year and missed the rest of those years. And this year he finishes rushing wise. He had 218 carries for 1,074 yards and 20 touchdowns. And then passing, he was 176 of 274 for 2,775 yards with 30 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. So just a really great year all around for Pottsboro. There's big things are always expected at Pottsboro. They've had very few down seasons. They've only had one losing season under head coach Matt Poe. Even with the last 2 years go 6-5. Those are considered bad years. Just making the playoffs and losing in the first round. And they're gonna have to replace some guys. Shope graduates. Outside of Lyons will be back at receiver. But they lose Zach Talley. They're gonna lose Ezra Fritz. They're gonna lose Jason Hooker. They're gonna lose Robert Goins. So they're gonna have to replace some guys there. When it comes to the backfield, Cooper Townsley might be a main option. He was kind of the backup as a sophomore this year to Shope. But you're gonna have 3 of the 4 receiver spots are gonna be new. And the starting running back is going to be new. And then you're also going to have to deal with, pretty much a revamped offensive line. Daniel Graham does come back, but they had a lot of guys on the line that were starters that will not be back. Adrian De La Cruz was a senior. Riley Deaton was a senior. Hunter Fulton was a senior. So you've got some guys that, maybe you're only going to have, when everything shakes out, maybe 3-4 starters at the most coming back on offense, and the defense is going to be the same thing. A lot of those same names are defensive guys. Riley Deaton's a starter on defense. Hooker's a starter on defense. There's probably a little more that you'll have coming back. Tyler Ferris at corner, the guy who made the interception in the end zone against Brock to win that game. He'll be back. He's just a junior this year. Townsley will be back. Jackson Lipscomb at linebackers back. Silas Barr, who was an honorable mention All-State guy on the defensive line, will be back. So they're a little more, set at defense, but you're still losing. You just go down the list. Zach Weidman at linebackers a loss. Keaton Edelman on the defensive line's a loss. Austin Cates at linebackers a loss. It's going to be interesting to see how they replace those guys, especially with the expectations of coming off a state runner-up finish. But again, just a great year by Pottsboro, and I'm sure big things are expected from them again next year. The other game that followed them in this great doubleheader that we had at AT&T Stadium was the Class 3A Division II state championship game, and that was between Gunter and Paul Pewitt. And Gunter was able to earn their second state championship in 4 years with a 43-22 victory. They won it in 2016 to kind of kick off this run, where they've now gone state champion, state runner-up, state semifinalist, and state champion. So the senior class over at Gunter, just a fantastic run. They entered high school with the program never having made it past a region final, and now they've been a part of a program having the 4 best seasons in school history, a total record of 60 wins and just 3 losses. Their win totals were 16-0, 15-1, 14-1, and 15-1 after the victory that sent Paul Pewitt to a 14-2 record. So just a fantastic run of things over there. A lot of people kind of thought that, especially compared to some of the previous teams, this was not, a Gunter squad that could potentially contend for a championship. I think a lot of people viewed Canadian as the favorite on their side of the bracket, and obviously, maybe that Gunter was the best in the region, but definitely had Canadian, which was the team that beat Gunter last year in the semifinals and finished as the runner-up against Newton. That Canadian was kind of the preordained. They were the number 1 team pretty much once Newton lost. And that was Canadians' only loss. So there were a lot of people that kind of were not as high on Gunter as they have been in recent years, which is, I mean, like I said, winning your region still makes you one of the 4 best teams in the state. So it's not like, they said, oh, hey, they're not going to make the playoffs or something like that. But it's one of those deals where, there were some other teams that they were kind of viewed ahead of them, but Gunter just has found a way during this run. They make plays, whether it's on offense or defense, and we'll get to that here when we kind of recap this game. They just find ways to win, and they expect to win, and they're on a run where it just kind of carries over. In facing Paul Pewitt, this was a team that I mentioned that they'd already beaten one Texoma team. They took care of Bells in the region semifinals, 53-20. So I got a chance to see them. I didn't know a whole lot about East Bernard, but when I talked to Coach Fizell, even before the semifinals, we were getting ready to do that and preview the Canadian game. I kind of asked him, about scouting, looking ahead. Some coaches don't like doing that. Some coaches don't mind, trying to set things up, getting ready, and that sort of thing. And I told him, I said, I think you want Paul Pewitt to win. I don't know a whole lot about East Bernard yet. I said, but I've seen Paul Pewitt, and they have some really good athletes, and they look good, but they run slot T. They are a true running team. They do not want to pass the ball. And as anybody who has seen Gunter's defense over the last 4 years, they are really good at stopping the run. If that's one thing they do better than anything in any aspect of offense or defense or special teams, it's Gunter will stop the run. And so I thought that was a really good matchup for them, and it turned out that it was. It maybe took a little bit to break the game open, and we'll touch on that now. So Gunter got the ball to start the game. They go right down and score. Clayton Reed has a 12-yard touchdown run. 7 plays, 70 yards, 2.5 minutes, 7-0. And people in the press box and on social media were like, okay, that's impressive. Pewitt's going to get a stop. And then they don't. And Gunter gets the ball back. And then they go 82 yards in 8 plays in barely 2 minutes. And it's 14-0 right off the bat. And now you're just like, okay, this looks like it's going to be a runaway. And it did. It looked, you got the sense that, Pewitt was going, 3 and out, turn the ball right back over to Gunter. Gunter would go and score. So Pewitt did get on the board late in the first quarter. Cross Holder had a 1-yard run. He threw a conversion pass. So it's 14-8. So maybe things have settled down. Maybe there were some nerves. Gunter is a team, like we mentioned, they have kids who have been to 3 championship games They may not have played in them, but they've been on the sidelines. They've been at Cowboy Stadium. They understand what that whole sequence of events, getting ready and being warming up and going through everything. Pewitt hadn't been to the championship game since 2005, so you have none of these kids. They're having the best year they've ever had. They're excited. They're at Cowboy Stadium for the first time. So maybe they were just a little nervous at the beginning. They've settled in. They go and score. Everything's back to normal for them. So they kick off, and then Gunner goes right down and scores again. 10 plays, 57 yards, 5 minutes off the clock. It's 22-8 with a little under 9 minutes to go until halftime, and 3 possessions, 3 touchdowns. Gunner's averaging 8 yards a play. I mean, Pewitt just can't stop them. They're not doing anything defensively to even really slow Gunner down. And then Pewitt again, 3 and out, ball goes right back to Gunner. And now you're in a real danger zone. I mean, you haven't stopped the Tigers. If they go down and score, and they make it 30-8, middle of the second quarter, that could have been it. And Gunner gets into Pewitt territory. They have 3rd and long. I believe it was 3rd and 9, and they go to pass, and Hudson Graham is picked off by Kadrian Johnson. And not only is he picked off, but Johnson puts together a 75-yard interception return, weaving his way. He started to the right, and then he cut all the way back to the left, and then he had to cut all the way back to the right. He probably ran about 180 yards just on the 75-yard interception return to get his way to the end zone. He lost his shoe the last about 15 yards, and that's exactly what Pewitt needed. So now it's 22-14. They went for 2. They didn't get it. So also on the play, which was a huge play, there was a penalty. It was a face mask penalty. They enforced the penalty on the kickoff. So instead of kicking from the normal spot, it was 15 yards up the field and into Gunner territory. So Pewitt decides to go for the onside kick, and they recover it. So we're about 5 minutes left in the half, and they decide to onside kick it. So they do that, and I'm sorry, there's less than that. Sorry, there's about 2 minutes left in the half, okay, I'm totally screwing up my series of events. It was a long day. Okay, so Gunner did get the ball back, and they took off some clock, and then there was another interception. Pewitt did get an onside kick, but they didn't do anything with it. And it looked like Gunner had dodged a bullet there. But Gunner got the ball back. There's about 2.5 minutes left. And they still have a chance to go back up by 2 scores. And Johnson comes up with another interception. So now there's about a minute and a half left. They're in Gunner territory, and have a chance to either have a chance to tie the game at halftime. Which if you saw the first 14 minutes of this game, you would have been like, that's a miracle. And it comes down to 10 seconds left in the half. It's 4th and goal at the 1-yard line, and Johnson is able to get around the right end, leaps, stretches the ball out, and lands in the end zone. And Holder scores on a keep on the conversion. So we're all tied up at 22 going into halftime. Total opposite. Gunner controlled the first quarter and a half. Pewitt took advantage of some mistakes in a 5-minute span, and you're tied. And you're looking at the stats, and Gunner's dominating, yards, the whole thing, but the 2 turnovers really hurt them. So Gunner goes in at half. It's tied. You're not losing. You still got 2 quarters to play, and then they come out and they totally dominate both sides of the ball, and close out this win. Pewitt had 5 possessions in the second half. They had 2 turnovers on downs. They had an interception late in the fourth quarter, which we'll get to when we're recapping that. They had a 3 and out, and then they had a first down and then punted. And that was all they did on 5 possessions in the second half. They gained 52 yards in the second half, came nowhere close to scoring, and that allowed Gunter to gain control of the game. So the best drive for Pewitt was the first drive of the second half. They got a first down. Looks like they're moving the ball, and then they have to punt. And then every possession after that just did not go well at all. Gunter's first possession of the third quarter, Peyton Lowe finishes off that drive with 5:21 to go in the third with a 4-yard run. It was an 8-play drive, covered 76 yards and 4 minutes. And Gunter goes up 29-22. And then again, defense stones them. First play of the fourth quarter to cap an 8-play drive. It covered 3.5 minutes. Bryson Rigsby scores on a 4-yard run, so it's 36-22. And then with 8 minutes to go, again, Pewitt at this point is forced. They have to go for it, even though they're on their side of the field, and it's a fourth and long. They knew they had to go for it. They could not punt the ball back and let Gunter potentially drive 70 yards and chew up 6 minutes of clock. So they went for it at their own 37. They didn't get it. And then with 8:20 left, Gunter gets the final touchdown of the game. Lowe scores again on a 9-yard run to make it 43-22. David Denton followed that up with the interception late. And Gunter was able to, like I said, they just dominated in the second half. And not just in the second half. When you look at the overall team stats, Paul Pewitt ran 42 times for 130 yards, and you say, well, that's not bad, and it's not bad. That's 3.1 yards a carry. It's not terrible. However, when you look at the grand scheme of Pewitt's season, it says how good Gunter's defense was. Pewitt came in with a 2,000-yard rusher, 2 1,000-yard rushers, another guy who went over 1,000 yards for the season in this game, and then another guy with 800 yards. So that's over 6,000 yards rushing on the season. It was about 6,200 yards coming in. They averaged 418 yards per game rushing, just rushing. Now they didn't throw the ball a lot, and we'll get to that here in a second about why that ended up being a turning point. So to hold a team that averages 418 yards coming into the 416 yards coming into the state championship game to 130 yards, that's just phenomenal. I mean, they did not let them do anything that Pewitt wanted to do. I mean, they would just get little 1 yard, 3 yard, 1 yard. I mean, they just could not do anything. And I mentioned they didn't really pass. Pewitt only threw 41 times all season. That worked out to about 3 passes per game. Well, in this game, Crossholder was 5 of 12 with an interception for 44 yards. So they threw about 10% of their passes on the season in this game. And Gunter forced them into that, and you could tell that they were not prepared to do that. They tried to do these little throwback, roll way right or left and throw back to a running back. I mean, there was no semblance of a passing game, and that played right into what Gunter does. Like I said, Gunter was going to shut down the run. They did that, and then Pewitt didn't have an answer. Whereas Gunter, second half, they ran 29 plays. They ran the ball on every play. They did not throw the ball in the second half. They didn't have to throw the ball in the second half. They finished with 361 yards and it was actually 371 yards before you take down the 2 kneel downs at the end of the game. They had 23 first downs to Pewitt's 10. They had almost 400 yards. If you take out the kneel downs, they had 405 yards to the 174 yards by Pewitt. I mean, they just dominated in the second half. From an offensive standpoint, Clayton Reed led Gunter. He had 17 carries for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rigsby had 18 carries for 99 yards and 1 touchdown. I was joking with him in the locker room after the game. There was a play as Gunter was running out the clock where they still had to run plays because Pewitt had timeouts, and he had a 5-yard carry that was wiped out because there was a penalty, and Gunter could have kept the play. They didn't have to accept the penalty, but they did because it allowed them to run an extra play after running some time off the clock. So Rigsby went to 104 yards and then ended up dropping back through no fault of his own to the 99 yards. And then Peyton Lowe had a chance to make it potentially 3 100-yard rushers for the Tigers. He had 10 carries for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Hudson Graham, he had a touchdown run to make he had 6 carries for 37 yards. Like I said, all in all, it was 56 carries for 361 yards. That's 6.4 yards a carry. I don't know if I mentioned. So Graham's touchdown was the second one. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. It was a 1-yard run after to make it 14-0. So and there was not much in the passing game for either side. And then defensively, Lowe led the team with 7.5 total tackles, 2.5 for a loss. Josh Majors had 5.5 tackles. Was in on shared a tackle for loss. Reed had 5 tackles, a pass breakup, and half a tackle for a loss. Mitchell Brewer had 4.5 tackles. Rigsby had 4 tackles and a pass breakup. Ashton Bennett had 3 tackles, including 1 for a loss, and forced a fumble. So it was just, like I said, it was just a really phenomenal game defensively for Gunter. Lowe was named the defensive MVP of the game. That's the second time in his career that he's won that. He won that as a freshman, and just a complete full circle sort of career for Lowe. He was the freshman starter for that talented 16-0 group, and he was a main contributor. He's basically started every game for 4 years, and is kind of the face of what this run has been, because he stepped right in and was able to to win both of the championships as a starter. And the offensive MVP of the game was Clayton Reed. Like I said, he had the 2 touchdowns, 17 carries for the 119 yards, 7 yards a carry. He also caught a pass for 20 yards and kind of set the tone at the running game. And I mentioned for Pewitt that they had all these great numbers, over 6,000 yards rushing. Ended up having 4 guys rush for 1,000 yards and do all those things. And the way Gunter plays, I'm sure they could run the score up on people and run some stats up on people. But you can really talk about the balance of what their offense does. It took until this championship game for Gunter to have a 1,000-yard rusher. And this is a team that played 16 games, won 15 of them, and doesn't really throw the ball. It shows you the balance of this team. Reed went over 1,000 yards in the game. He has 146 carries for 1,087 yards and 9 touchdowns on the season. I mean, most people can do that in the regular season. But then you look and you say, okay, so he has 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns on just 146 carries. It's a really good average. And then Lowe had only 94 carries, but he managed 768 yards. That's about 8 yards a carry and 14 touchdowns. And then Rigsby was right behind him with 144 carries for 752 yards and 10 touchdowns. So, and then a little ways down behind him, Graham at quarterback, he had 106 carries for 485 yards and 9 touchdowns. And that's not counting, some of these ancillary guys, and Ethan Sloan, who averaged almost 10 yards a carry, because he had 35 carries for 307 yards and 3 touchdowns. And, Mitchell Brewer had 50 carries for 290 yards and 5 touchdowns. So, Gunter's really good about spreading the wealth. But, you you add it all up, and you have an offense and an attack. You can't focus on one guy. It's just really impressive what they've done. And again, we talk about with Pottsboro, big expectations for next year. We'll see what realignment does for both of these teams and how that will affect things. But again, you have a team with Gunter. I mean, they're going to lose some really key pieces. I mean, you lose Peyton Lowe, and I don't know how you replace a kid like a Peyton Lowe, who's been a starter for 4 years on defense and has contributed a whole lot on offense. Bryson Rigsby's a two-way starter, both at that fullback spot and at linebacker. Clayton Reed's going to be gone. He's a starter on, as a running back. And in the secondary, David Denton is a two-way starter. You're playing in the secondary and at wide receiver. You have some offensive linemen. Colton Mercer is going to be gone. Josh Majors is going to be gone. So you do have a quarterback back. Hudson Graham will be a junior next year, and I'm sure you kind of look to him to be a leader. Mitchell Brewer is a guy who will be a senior. He's we said he's contributed both at quarterback and at running back spot. I would expect maybe Ethan Sloan is going to be one of those guys jumping in to get a lot more carries. He was just a sophomore this year. But Gunter finds guys. Offensive line wise, they had some sophomores. Lane Dopeed and Trey Oblas. They're both sophomores, and they were starters on the offensive line. So they do have some young pieces. But when you lose some of the guys that you're losing, guys who have been 2 and 3 year starters that are the heart of a championship team, especially defense too, because a lot of those guys on that side of the ball are going to be gone. The secondary is basically going to be all new, because they not only do they lose the guys we mentioned, but Grant McAfee was a guy who was a starter on defense. Braden Sloan, a guy on the defensive line. I mean, they're going to lose some guys, and the one thing that they have shown through this run is they will plug guys in and out. I talked to Colton Mercer as we were getting ready to preview the championship game and about this senior class, and I talked to him and I talked to Clayton Reed for that particular week, and everybody knows about how Peyton has been the guy in the senior class who was a starter for all 4 years and was a starter on the last one, and this was his third game. Clayton said, I'm getting a chance to play in my second, because he didn't get in the game as a freshman, but he was able to play in the game as a sophomore. And Colton's response was, this is my first chance to play in a championship game. I didn't play in the first two, and then my junior year we lost to Canadian, so this is my first chance. And he basically said, when it's your time, and you need to be ready, and you need to do the job that they expect you to do. And that's kind of what has kept this run going. Is you might be replacing a Trey Carr or a Dylan Jantz or a Braden Clopton or whoever is next year with somebody's gonna step in at Peyton Lowe's spot, or somebody's gonna step in at Bryson Rigsby's spot, or someone's gonna step in at Clayton Reed's spot, and they're going to expect you to do just as good a job. And for 4 years, it's the machine has just kept rolling, and it's going to be interesting to see who's the next group, who's the next wave of guys to kind of keep this thing going. And like we said, depending on realignment, there's a good chance that Gunter could be the favorite again. Doesn't mean that they're going to win the region or or return to the state championship game. It will be interesting just from a realignment standpoint, because 2 years from now they're probably going to go up to 3A Division I, which I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to see them leave Division II. But again, just a great finish. Gunter's being talked about now. If they weren't viewed as one of the top programs in a 3A in the state, they definitely are now. With this 4-year run that was completed with a second championship. So that's going to wrap up the 2019 football season here on the podcast. This was the first year that we decided to do that. We've gotten some positive feedback. So obviously the plan is to keep continuing that. We may add some things. We did the interviews with coaches. We may do, I don't know, a question segment at some point. We'll kind of figure that out. As like I said, this was kind of a trial and error season. And then I don't know what the plan is for the rest of the school year in terms of a podcast. I know I'll definitely do something in either late January / early February around realignment. Both as a preview. The preview will probably be shorter than the reaction because we kind of know as much as we can know. But I'll just kind of do a little realignment primer leading into the actual announcement, and then I'll do a reaction one to follow after that. And then we'll just kind of see from there, if what we can do in terms of that. But again, thanks for checking in every week. It's been a long season. I hope everybody has a good holiday this coming week. I'm looking forward to a vacation, a well-deserved one since I haven't had about any time off in 6 months. I'm not complaining, but that's what happens when you have two teams as good as Pottsboro and Gunter have been this whole year to keep everybody busy, whether you're covering them in the media, you're following them every week as an alum or as a student or just as a fan of really good football in this area. It was a great season all around, capped by these two championship game performances, and so that's where we are. So thanks for